Sign it and get it over with, my wife said, as she forced me to sign away everything with her lawyer smirking beside her. She thought I was just a foolish old contractor, but I had already hidden every asset and recorded her trap. Just sign it, she said, standing over me like a prosecutor with her closing argument, her tone sharp enough to cut steel. It's not a divorce, it's just for convenience. You'll still have access, just not control. The papers landed on my desk with a flick of her wrist. Ulcro, clean, practiced. She had rehearsed this, probably in that same smug tone she used when correcting waiters or reminding me that this century doesn't need your little rituals, Paul. Her lawyer sat a half-meter away with his legs crossed, tapping a very expensive pen against his clipboard as if he were already billing by the hour. Young, polished, definitely not old enough to remember dial-up internet. His tie screamed, "I want to impress." I looked up from the document and met her eyes. Her mouth was smiling, but her pupils were hard, tiny, bright points. She was already celebrating. "If you love me," she said again, maybe softer. "Sign it." I stared at the page. Then I signed my name slowly and clearly. "There you go," I said. "Did you get what you wanted?" I stood up, pushed my chair in quietly, and walked out of the room. Behind me, her lawyer chuckled. "Well, that was easier than expected." Susan laughed. "I told you he'd fold." Their glasses clinked. A toast, maybe to her freedom, to my humiliation. What they didn't notice, what they never bothered to notice, was the second sheet of paper I pulled from the bottom drawer on my way out. Identical format, identical header, except it wasn't her document, it was mine. Same signature, very different terms. If this beginning has caught your attention, consider subscribing. More than 90% of our listeners never do, and every new subscriber pushes our team to keep creating stories like this. I walked down the hallway I built with my own hands. Every floorboard sanded and varnished during that winter. Susan was away networking in wine country, the same wine country where she met Mr. Clipboard. She never really knew the house. She lived in it like a hotel guest, rearranging furniture, complaining about the shadows. By the time I reached the garage, the signed document was in a sealed envelope tucked into a messenger bag I had packed 3 days ago. A few clicks on the car's dashboard. The GPS rerouted to a location I never told her about. I wasn't running, I was delivering. You see, while she was busy playing Queen of the Castle, I had been restoring a different kingdom. Not a fantasy, not a revenge spectacle, just precision. The kind of planning you only learn when you've been the guy who cleans up the mess. Because Susan never knew who she married. She thought she had married a carpenter who got lucky selling some commercial properties in his 50s. What she never asked, what she never cared enough to ask, was what I did before that. She heard contractor and assumed manual labor. She never read between the lines on my tax returns. She never asked why I had regular calls with someone named L. Ain who wasn't in my contact list. She never questioned why I kept a locked file cabinet labeled Denver Holdings when we had never lived in Colorado, and she never read the footer on the power of attorney form. Because if she had taken 2 seconds to flip the page, she might have seen the clause I wrote 7 years ago, the one designed for this exact moment. By the time they opened their wine, I was already 3 counties away. I stopped at a small rest area overlooking a frozen lake. I lit a cigarette I hadn't touched in 6 months, and I laughed. Not because I had won, but because they still thought the game had just begun. Susan's phone buzzed so violently on the bedside table that it knocked over her banned oil diffuser, her latest remedy for anxiety. She groaned with her face still buried in the silk pillowcase she had specially ordered from France and blindly swiped at the screen. 7 missed calls. A text from her lawyer. "Call me urgent." She blinked annoyed. Dylan was dramatic by nature. He once called her at 3 in the morning because an urgent client contract had a typo in the footer. She pressed the call button anyway, just to shut him up. He answered on the first ring. "Susan," he whispered breathlessly. "I did a background check. I had to." She rolled her eyes, sitting up as the duvet slipped off one shoulder. "On Paul. He's just a resentful old contractor with a pension." "What?" "He built a shed under an alias." There was silence on the line, and not the guilty kind, the terrified kind. "No, he's not. Susan, you have to look at his records, not just his old jobs. What he's been doing with your accounts." "Sekiro here, what are you talking about?" "I emailed it to you. Check your inbox. Just look." And Susan hesitated. "You have to ask yourself who you married." She opened her email. There it was. Paul background packet. Inside, a single PDF. The first page was a work summary. He wasn't a carpenter, not even close. Corporate recovery consultant registered with 3 national firms, specialist in asset protection, trust restructuring, and forensic dissolution planning during hostile financial events. Translation: he was the guy companies called when they were about to be torn apart and needed to make sure the important pieces didn't bleed out with the vultures. She blinked, kept scrolling. 10 pages of corporate records, 8 shell companies, 3 advisory boards, a marked security clearance. Her own name appeared on page 8, right next to a list of account permissions he had already revoked. Her mouth went dry. Wait. This is wrong, she said. He fixed bathrooms for 3 years. I saw the invoices. Dylan sighed. Yes, you saw what he wanted you to see. Did you really think that man didn't know what he was doing with those forms? Her heart skipped a beat. He never used Herga. He didn't talk because people like him don't need to. That's what makes them scary. You're dealing with someone who doesn't just hide money. He hides the reasons. She stood up, the robe sliding off her shoulder. How long? I don't know, but his last contract ended 5 years ago. The same year he met you, right? Her legs gave out. She sat on the edge of the bed, numb. So what are you saying? That he planned this from the beginning? I'm not saying he prepared for this from the beginning. Big difference. Susan opened her banking app. Her eyes went to the joint savings account. Still visible, still normal. She let out a shaky breath until she tapped to see recent changes. Access revoked. Co-owner Palter. 32 days ago. Notification deferred by trustee. Her thumb was shaking. She scrolled. A note at the bottom. Discretion clause. Alert to second party suspended for 30 days. Dylan's voice came back. Lower now. He knew. Susan waited. And he didn't just react, he architected it. She stood up slowly and crossed the room to the mirror. She looked like a woman in control, shiny hair, silk robe, manicured nails. But her reflection looked like a stranger, like someone outmaneuvered. Why didn't he say something? She whispered. Because he didn't need to, Dylan said. You already said it all for him the moment you brought me into the room. Susan didn't answer. She kept staring at her own eyes, trying to remember when she stopped recognizing the man in the house across the way, and when she stopped realizing that maybe he never needed to raise his voice, because the quiet ones, they're the ones who sign papers with one hand and rearrange your entire life with the other. The house in Lexington Re had always been Susan's trophy. The way she gave guests the height with outstretched arms, dramatic pauses, casual mentions that, and the beams were imported from Italy, you'd think she had drawn the plans herself. It didn't matter that Paul was the one who restored every floorboard, custom-built the cabinets, and drove 8 hours to pick up the exact granite slab she claimed just appeared in the remodel. What she didn't know, what it never occurred to her to ask, was whose name the deed was actually in. While she sat by the bay window searching for this modern, moody farmhouse inspiration, Paul was driving north, not to a lawyer, not to a storage unit, but to a small gray office tucked behind a bait shop marked only by a crooked mailbox with no name. Inside was Elaine. Late 50s, sharp glasses, sharper mind. She didn't ask how he was. She never did. You're late, she said, glancing at the trust folder already open on her desk. Traffic, Paul said with a tired smile. She slid a form toward him. This is the last step. Once we file this amendment, the title is completely sealed until the end of the lockup period, which means she can't touch it. He finished. Not now, not in 5 years. Elaine nodded. It's already retroactive. The original title date places it outside of marital acquisition. Paul signed. No hesitation. She clipped the document into a folder, placed it in a pre-stamped envelope, and tapped her nails. Done. Back at the house, Susan was on hold with the county clerk's office, her finger tapping a wine glass like a telegraph machine. The walls around her were suddenly too quiet, too big, too not hers. When the clerk finally answered, Susan jumped in. I'm calling to confirm a real estate title. My husband may have filed something unauthorized. The clerk, what's the property address? She gave it to him. Clicks, typing. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no current title transfer in your name. No, she said, pinching the bridge of her nose. I mean a recent transfer from my name, as if you were trying to override it. There's no record of you ever holding the title. The property is in the name of a closed trust. It has been for a moment. More clicks. 6 years. Susan froze. What? What do you mean 6 years? I live here. I've renovated here. Yes, ma'am, but you've never been the owner. Not according to our records. Click. Dial tone. Susan stood in the center of the open concept living room she thought she ruled, surrounded by carefully curated artifacts from a life she assumed was secure. Candles arranged in odd numbers, decorative bowls with nothing in them. $2,000 rugs no one was allowed to step on. None of it mattered. None of it was hers. The illusion shattered. She threw her phone against the wall. It bounced with a dull thud. She stormed into the study, yanked open the empty file cabinet. No deed, no paperwork, just a yellowed receipt from Home Depot and a half-eaten glove. The framed wedding photos stared at her from the bookshelf. Paul's eyes suddenly seemed to know something. To know everything. She screamed, not the dramatic kind, but the guttural, choked kind, as if her lungs were trying to spit out the truth. Too late. In the gray office, 2 hours north, Elaine looked at Paul's hand. He held his wedding ring between two fingers. Are you keeping it? Paul smiled faintly. Not anymore. He dropped it into the paper shredder next to the desk. It landed with a soft, barely audible clink. Elaine looked up. Are you sure about this? I was sure the day she walked into that study with a lawyer and a smug smile, he said. This is just the paperwork catching up. And just like that, what Susan thought was a shared empire was nothing more than a well-decorated illusion, a trophy case in someone else's name. Susan slammed the Tesla door with enough force to make the valet flinch. She didn't wait for the ticket. She just stormed into Dylan's office in sunglasses, designer boots, and a fury that filled the elevator before she did. She didn't even bother with formalities. Tell me you can fix this. Dylan looked up from his desk, his face pale, his tie askew. This wasn't his usual smug confidence. This was the face of a man checkmated on his own chessboard. You saw the back, right? Susan stopped short. What back? The blink, the back of the power of attorney form, the one he signed. She narrowed her eyes. There was no back. I was standing over him. Dylan leaned forward, his hands shaking slightly. Yes, there was. Susan, I have it right here. He opened a folder and slid a familiar-looking document across the table. Her signature, Paul's, all official. Then he turned it over. There it was, highlighted in neat blue ink, like a dagger waiting in plain sight. Authority revoked for breach of marital trust, including but not limited to the presence of undisclosed third-party legal influence during signing. Susan blinked at the words as if they were written in fire. Dylan whispered, he set you up. What the hell does that mean? It means the moment you brought me into that study, the clause activated. Legally, your demand became coercive. I was a witness, your lawyer, applying pressure to secure authority. And now that document voids itself. She stood there stunned, but he signed it. He signed his version with that clause already embedded. Dylan pulled out a second sheet, a time-stamped photo of Paul holding the signed page, the camera angle clearly showing Susan and Dylan hovering nearby. Then he produced a small USB. He recorded the conversation too. Her stomach dropped. I didn't authorize a recording. He didn't need your authorization, Dylan snapped. One-party consent. This is your house, not a courtroom. Susan's mouth opened. It closed. We can argue intent. It was manipulative. He knew I'd be emotional, that I'd push. To Dylan held up a hand. You're not in control anymore. She felt something hollow break in her chest. He wanted you to demand it, Dylan continued. He wanted me to be there. He wanted this to look like pressure because he knew exactly what that clause would do. And Susan finally looked him in the eyes. You walked him straight into a legal fortress and locked the gates behind him. Susan sank into the chair, staring at the document as if it had betrayed her. It was supposed to be her victory, her moment, her leverage. Now it was a trap, and Paul didn't just fall into it. He built it around her quietly, strategically, like a man who had watched her bluff one too many times and finally called her on it with a smile. Can we suppress the recording? She asked, her voice barely audible. Dylan looked exhausted. He's already filed it through an external trustee. It's not even in his name anymore. But this was just a power of attorney. No, this is leverage, Dylan cut in. And he has it. She stood up again, pacing. No, there has to be something. There was, Dylan said. It was the moment before you walked into that study with me. You could have talked to him like a human being, but you didn't. You tried to corner someone who builds corner offices for billion-dollar meltdowns. Susan's hand gripped the edge of the table. Her nails dug into the wood. This isn't fair. Dylan laughed bitterly. You're right. You brought a chessboard. He built the room the board sits in. She stared at the blue ink. 6 clean words. Undisclosed third-party legal influence. The line wasn't just legal, it was surgical. Because Paul didn't need a fight. He just needed her to reach for the sword so the blade would turn in her hand. She thought she was forcing an old man to surrender. She never realized she was playing a script he drafted the day they met. Susan parked sideways, taking up 2 spots, threw the car in park and didn't even bother to lock it, and she stormed through the glass doors of the bank with that speed that makes all the tellers look up, but pretend not to. One of the cashiers flinched when she slammed her hand on the reception counter. I need to speak to a manager now. The man who came over, clean-shaven, mid-40s in a striped tie and a name tag that read nail, had the weary posture of someone who had already dealt with divorcees trying to freeze accounts. How can I help you today? My name is Susan Tilson. I need full access to the joint savings account in the name of Paul and Susan Tilson. There's been unauthorized activity, and I need. Neil was already pulling up the record, but he stopped halfway. I'm sorry. There's been a change of control on that account. Your name is currently listed with an active party status. Susan blinked. What the hell does that mean? Nell turned the screen toward her. It means the co-firma rights have been legally revoked. The documentation is on file. She leaned over the counter. Show me. He hesitated. Then he tapped a few keys, clicked twice, and slid a printed document across the counter. She scanned it. Paul's signature, Dated over a month ago. She felt her throat tighten. This isn't possible. We live in Bestbury. Why does it say it was notarized in Delaware? Neil nodded. Yes, ma'am. He established temporary residency, opened a post office box, rented a certified short-term unit, lived there long enough to meet the requirements, and then filed the revocation in that jurisdiction, which is valid here under the Uniform Commercial Code. Wait, he moved to Deo to sign this. Technically, yes, briefly, but it was enough. Susan flipped the document over. The notary seal was real. Legal, impeccably done, like everything Paul touched when he was focused. Her fingers were trembling. Didn't you think to notify me? The revocation included a deferred notification clause which under the trustee amendment codes delays the alert to the signing CEO for 30 calendar days after activation. She stared blankly. In English, she snapped. Nell sighed. It means we didn't have to tell you until today. And today was the exact day she stormed in. Right on schedule. She looked around as if the air had betrayed her. So, you're telling me he waited for the clause to mature and then just sat back? Neil nodded again. Correct. She started to laugh not because it was funny, but because it was insane. Her own husband had moved to another state, not to run away, but to re-architect the access to their own money in a place she had never even thought to look. Can I make a withdrawal? She asked one last time. Neil gave a tight smile. You can file a formal petition with the new controlling party? Susan narrowed her eyes. And who is that? He turned the monitor slightly and pointed. Tilson Trust ID 7F. Protected Trust. Authorized Agent. Paul Tilson. Successor Agent redacted. Co-signing privileges revoked. Notification status delivered. Susan froze. Is there anything else I can help you with today? I asked. Not cruelly. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her heart was beating hard enough to drown out her thoughts. There wasn't a single bank branch, not a single clause she could lean on. Everything she thought she could touch, every asset she had planned to drain, delay, or bypass, had been rewired bulletproof, sealed like a tomb, not because Paul fought back, but because he never left the door open in the first place. She backed away from the counter slowly, her eyes glazed. At the exit she paused, turned around. If you think this is over, she said loudly, you don't know who you're dealing with. Nellie raised an eyebrow. No, ma'am, he said calmly. I don't think I ever underestimated her. And that was the part that hurt the most. She thought she had married a man who didn't play the game. It turned out he wrote the playbook in a state she didn't even know he'd visited. Susan was halfway through an oat milk cappuccino when the email notification chimed. Subject, G redesign timeline, October Executive Solutions COO. She clicked without hesitation. Ito was her star client. A full-floor redesign at their flagship downtown office. Marble lobby, glass conference tables, all sustainable. The kind of project that got you on covers, maybe even a TDX invite. Susan, upon internal review, we have decided to postpone the redesign project indefinitely. She froze. Reread the sentence twice. There was no greeting, no apology, no explanation, just a short line underneath. Please see attached file. She clicked. It was a screenshot of a legal bulletin that circulated privately among corporate compliance departments. Her name was circled in red. Pending ethics dispute in marital property proceedings involving active trust litigation. Subject Susan Tilson. Affiliation. Independent design consultant. Risk level under review. Her mouth went dry. She scrolled down. Another email arrived. Same thread, different sender. Subject off the record. Denanemes@protonmail.com. I suggest you resolve your situation discreetly. Our firm values discretion. A friend. Her stomach churned. Paul didn't leak this. She was sure of it. It wasn't his style. He didn't play dirty. He played clean. He let the consequences unfold like dominoes. Someone else had pushed, but someone somewhere in his vast network had pulled a thread. Maybe it was Lane. Maybe it was that daughter of his with the real estate license and the buried grudge. She Googled Tilson Trust Dispute. Second result, a PDF file indexed in a public compliance archive. Her name, Paul's, the trust. Ownership discrepancies, advisory notes, all technically legal, all publicly embarrassing. Her phone buzzed. Another email, this one from Trendform Solutions, a startup she had done 3 concept rooms for. Our board policy. We're pausing all projects pending ethical clearance, no explanation, no appeal. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair, one she designed herself, by the way, and tried to breathe. For the first time, the home office felt like a glass cage. Her empire of light woods and matte black finishes was suddenly suffocating. Fake eucalyptus in the corner, perfect little clay figurines from Bali, inspiration boards on the wall, and none of it mattered because in the space of 10 minutes her name had gone from Susan Tilson, aesthetic strategist, to Susan Tilson, a risk. She opened Slack. Her 3 freelances had gone silent. One of them had left the shared workspace. She opened Instagram. Her last 2 posts had new comments. Is this the trust drama lady? LOL. Karma, huh? Aren't you being sued or something? She logged off, but the room was still the same. Quiet, still, betraying nothing. She picked up the phone and called Dylan. Fix it, she hissed. I'm trying, he answered, his voice hoarse. But you don't understand. These firms don't care about guilt, they care about image. It's ruining my career, she said. No, Susan, Dylan said. He's not ruining it. You gave him the match. He just let the room fill with gas. The line went dead. She threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. From her window, she could see the skyline she once thought she owned a piece of. Now she wasn't sure she could even walk into the lobby without someone scanning her name and politely asking her to wait outside. The collapse had already begun, not loudly, not with headlines, but with whispers behind conference room doors. And in her world, that's how empires really died. The login screen blinked at her like a taunt. Access denied. Susan typed her password again, this time harder. A denied. She clicked forgot password, entered her security code, verified her email only to receive a message that made her blood run cold. This user account is no longer recognized by the system. It was the tax software they had used for 6 years. The system Paul insisted on, secure, encrypted, double backed up, and mirrored cloud redundancy. Overkill, she used to joke. We're not running the Pentagon. Now she couldn't even find the front door. She minimized the tab and opened their shared drive. The folder labeled Shared Finance. Gone, not empty, gone. She clicked through every drive. Subfolders. Backups. Nothing. Gone as if it had never existed. She called Dylan in a panic. He's deleting everything. He answered on the second ring, but his voice was strangely calm. Tired? He's not deleting it. What? He's relocating it. They're cutting you out of the mirror. Legally, that's not possible. It's more than possible, Dylan said, now fully awake. He's archiving every shared record into a sealed trust container. Your user permissions were tied to your co-signing rights. Once those were revoked, your access automatically expired. Are you saying what? That he programmed this? Dylan exhaled slowly. Susan, your husband doesn't just build systems. First, he builds the exits. You were on borrowed digital time from the second he signed that trust. Her hands were shaking. And now what's happening? What's happening now, Dylan said, is that you're being deleted. Not contested, not fought, just erased. She stared at the blank screen, while the folders she thought were hers, wedding contracts, design invoices, joint tax returns, were no longer accessible, as if Paul had taken a giant virtual scalpel and cut her out pixel by pixel. Then, her phone buzzed. A new email from Paul. Subject severed. No body text, just an attachment, an audio file. She tapped play. Her own voice crackled through the speaker. Just sign it. She screamed, the fury in her tone unmistakable. In the background, Dylan's soft laugh. Then, silence. Just static. It was the moment she thought she had control. Frozen, time-stamped, documented, now turned into a weapon. She dropped the phone as if it burned her. It skittered across the floor and came to a stop under the coffee table next to a decorative tray she once insisted on buying from a boutique in Prague. It suddenly looked ridiculous. Everything did. The curated bookshelf, the mid-century chairs no one sat in, the $000 pendant light she justified as functional art. Her empire had become a beautiful, hollow, untouchable showroom. She went back to the phone, redialed Dylan, voicemail. She stood up, paced, punched the air, screamed at no one, and then sat back down. Another buzz, a system notification. You have been removed from the shared Dropbox. Tilson BMES, B archive. She covered her mouth with her hand. A choke sob. She hadn't cried in years, not even when her father died. Now the tears weren't polite or pretty. They gushed out as if the dam had broken, because this wasn't retaliation. This wasn't a man venting. This was a methodical deletion. Paul wasn't trying to ruin her. That would have been emotional, messy. He was doing something much worse. He was undoing her from his life quietly, precisely, and by the looks of it, he had just started. The receptionist at Dr. Linhall's practice didn't recognize Susan at first, probably because of the oversized sunglasses, the scarf, the way she chewed gum like a woman trying to pretend she wasn't falling apart. Do you have an appointment? The girl asked, too young to remember Susan's face from the carefully curated couples sessions years ago. No, Susan replied. Section. Tell her it's me. She'll know. 10 minutes later, she was ushered into the same room where she and Paul once sat on opposite ends of a leather couch, arms crossed, hearts armored. The walls were still that calming gray. The same diffuser hissed banned into the room, but nothing smelled safe anymore. Dr. Lindholm looked older. Her bob, once sharp, was longer now, streaked with silver. But her eyes, those frustratingly neutral therapist eyes, were the same. She didn't ask, "How are you?" She didn't need to. Susan sat down, threw her sunglasses on the coffee table like a threat. "I need to know what he told you." The doctor just folded her hands and waited. "You remember Paul, right?" "Yes," she said softly. "And I remember you." "Susan, I'm being erased." Susan snapped. "Digitally, legally, and financially. He has activated the ghost protocol and taken my name with him." Dr. Linhan just nodded. Susan leaned forward. "He told you he was going to do this, that he was planning it all those years." The therapist took a deep breath. Not dramatic, but measured. "He didn't say. He didn't plan it, but he prepared for it." Susan blinked. "So what? He came in here sweet and stoic, talking about boundaries and forgiveness, all while plotting my destruction." "No," the doctor said again. "He hoped he wouldn't have to use it." She leaned slightly. "But Paul, he always prepares. You knew that when you married him." Susan looked at the bookshelf behind her. She hated that calm, academic tone. She hated being on this side of the glass. Dr. Linhall continued. "You thought his silence meant weakness, but he doesn't scream when things break. He catalogs them quietly. So when the collapse comes, he's already standing somewhere else." Susan pressed her fingers to her temples. "So what now?" "What? He just wins. He just rides off into the sunset like a spreadsheet samurai." The doctor didn't smile, but there was something knowing in her expression. "I'm not here to take sides," she said. "But Paul asked me during your last session what it would take for someone to reclaim their name without spilling blood. I didn't have an answer then. I think he found one." Susan felt her throat go dry. "So I'm on my own in this now." Dr. Linhall hesitated, then pulled a worn business card from her drawer. She slid it across the table. Susan picked it up. It wasn't legal. It wasn't corporate, just a name, a number. She froze. "This is my sister's number." "Yes. We haven't spoken in 6 years." "I know. She blocked me." "I know," the doctor repeated. "But she's the only person who asked me after the wedding if you knew what you were doing. And she's the only one Paulo admitted to respecting, even when she hated him." Susan stared at the card as if it were a time bomb. She came to one silent session, listened, left, never came back. But she said something to Paul that he never forgot. Dr. Lincolnholm met her eyes. "Just because she's beautiful doesn't mean she's right. You'd better build an exit before she figures out how to burn the house to the ground." Susan stood up shakily. "Are you telling me my sister, who ignored me at my own wedding, was on his side?" "No," the therapist said softly. "I think she was on yours. You just stopped deserving it." Susan didn't say anything. She walked out of the office with the card clutched in her hand like a threat she wasn't sure how to use. Outside, the air was sharp. For the first time she realized she had no one left in her corner. No allies, no clients, no money, no leverage. Even her past was circling back, and it wasn't coming to save her. It was coming to collect. Susan was barely out of the shower when the doorbell rang. She looked at the clock. 7:18 a.m. No civilized person called at that hour unless someone was dead or about to be. Wrapped in a towel, she cracked open the front door. A courier in a windbreaker handed her a slim black envelope with a signature tab. No smile, no words, she signed. He left. No return address, no markings. Inside, a single letterhead stamped in silver foil. ISS, and she had never heard of it. She unfolded the contents with damp fingers. Subject: immediate execution of asset hold. Reference: Trust 47119B. The Tilson Family Protection Structure. Her pulse began to quicken. She read on. Protocol initiated by the executive agent and pursuant to clause activation within Trust 471B. This letter serves as formal notification of the following. Effective immediately. You, Susan Aline Tilson, are no longer authorized to access, claim, alter, or dispute any of the properties listed within the Tilson family asset portfolio. She scanned the next paragraph. It was brutal in its clarity. All co-owned properties frozen, all shared investment accounts transferred, all royalties from joint brand design work done under the Tilson name reassigned. She turned the page. Page 2. Consulting income, deferred tax returns, long-term annuities, furniture purchased by the trust. Even the vacation rental in Vermonton, which she used to pretend was her creative refuge, gone. The third page was just as cold, a list of all the professional contracts she had used Paul's name to access. Terminated. Her client directories wiped from the trust's digital records. The last point, Ethics Clause 4.3.7. All use of the name under the Tilson brand umbrella has been retroactively severed. You are to cease representing yourself under that designation in any formal or informal capacity. She got to the last line and froze. Signed, Emery Lynn Tilson, Trust Executive, ISS, and Paul's daughter, the one Susan once called a brat with designer knockoffs at a dinner party loud enough for everyone to hear. The same daughter she didn't invite to her wedding. The same daughter who showed up anyway in a gray blazer and a quiet fury and hugged Paul like she already knew. Susan had dismissed her as insignificant. It turned out she had been studying and waiting. The name echoed in her ears. ISS Paul used to mention it in passing. My little bunker, he joked once. In case the world decides to implode. Now it was real. A full-fledged legal entity, managed by a woman who owed Susan nothing and remembered everything. She stumbled back and sat on the stairs. The cold wood pressed against her back as she stared at the letter, the pages waving like execution orders. IIS, that wasn't just a trust, it was an armory, and she had been disarmed. The phone on the table buzzed. A text from Dylan. I got the notice. It's airtight too. We can try to challenge. But this isn't a courtroom game anymore. It's asset architecture. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She typed, deleted, typed again, and then threw the phone across the room. She tried to stand, slipped, sat back down. Why? What do you do when everything you called yours was never yours at all? Not the money, not the reputation, not even the name. Paul hadn't just erased her from his life. He had re-architected the foundations underneath it, and she wasn't even a footnote in the new version. She was a legal ghost, unrecognized, unwelcome, unnecessary. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was empty. Not the kind of empty that comes from absence, the kind that comes from being slowly and expertly gutted from the inside. Susan walked back into the study. Her heels clicked faintly against the hardwood floor Paul himself had installed. She hadn't noticed that before. The craftsmanship, the precision, the quiet way the boards fit together without protest. Now the air smelled different, less like band and teakwood, more like the stale breath of something that had taken its last exhale. The desk was clear. Every document, every file, every piece of paper that once cluttered its surface like confetti from their shared empire gone. Even the leather blotter had been removed. No mess, no drama, just absence. Her fingers brushed the drawer pull out of habit. She pulled it open slowly, empty, except for one thing, taped to the inside. Deliberate, centered, waiting. It was a single yellow sticky note. Her eyes locked on the handwriting. That tight, deliberate cursive, the kind Poole used when he wanted every letter to land like a signature. It read, "You didn't marry a contractor, you married a contingency." Her breath caught. She stood frozen, reading it over and over as if it would change, as if there were a version of reality where this note wasn't the final word. It didn't scream, it didn't taunt, it didn't gloat, it just was unapologetic, finished. She reached out to tear it off, but her hand trembled because this was the last thing he would ever leave for her. And unlike the house, the accounts, or the name, it couldn't be revoked. It was hers now, etched in ink and memory. Across town, in a diner that still used glass sugar shakers and served coffee thick as oil, Paul sat opposite Emery, his daughter and now his executive. The fluorescent light hummed above them. No music played, just the soft clatter of plates and the occasional whir of the refrigerator behind the counter. Emery stirred her tea with measured calm, watching him closely. Paul didn't talk much, never needed to. Not with her. The waitress poured him more coffee. He thanked her quietly. Then, with a steady hand, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a plain gold wedding band, and placed it in the napkin holder. Just like that. No words, no fanfare, just gone. Emery didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She just reached across the table and tapped his coffee mug twice. A signal, a closure. Back in the study, Susan sank into the same chair Paula had vacated weeks ago, the one where she demanded signatures, control, validation, the one where she had thought power lived in paper and ink and whispered threats over glasses of wine. Now all that was left was the echo. She looked at the note one last time. You didn't marry a contractor. You married a contingency. No courts, no confrontation, no grand revenge, just preparation. And now execution.